my name is Abigail and welcome to or back to Polyglot Progress. 2023 was a really rough year for me, both in terms of my language learning and my personal life. But the silver lining is that even though I didn't make a ton of progress in my target languages in terms of number of textbooks finished or CEFR levels increased, I still progressed in my journey as a language learner because I learned more about the ways that I learn languages and the ways that I can be a better language learner in the future. So today I just want to share 5 of the things that I feel like I learned about language learning this year in the hopes that we can all benefit from these lessons. Starting off with one of the first and also biggest lessons that I feel like I learned this year, to see real big change in your language learning or your life, you need to solve the actual root of your problems and not just make small changes and tiny fixes and hope that that works. The last quarter of 2022 was really marked by pretty bad burnout for me that really impacted my language learning and basically every other aspect of my life. And I really tried to counteract that by building better habits, getting back into the things that I loved, and reducing some unhealthy habits I had, like aimlessly scrolling through TikTok. But while that temporarily worked, and in December 2022 I was feeling a little bit better, feeling like I had solved the problem, I quickly found in January and the following months that I was still feeling really burnt out. And trying to replace time on my phone with learning languages or trying to wake up earlier to go on a walk wasn't actually solving my problem. And in fact, were things that sometimes made it worse because I just really did not have the brain power to be giving studying or writing or things like that. But when I actually started to address the root cause of my burnout and make more targeted and major changes, like leaving a job that was no longer fulfilling me to pursue the career I actually wanted to have, or incorporating balance into my life in more meaningful ways instead of just through superficial changes, I started to actually see a change and bounce back from burnout. And even other than the burnout example, I feel like I had so many instances over the course of 2023, both language related and not, that really showed me the benefit of making big scary changes and showed me that stepping outside of my comfort zone can really make room for change that ultimately really benefits me. I'm definitely not saying that the answer is to completely uproot your life whenever things aren't working, but I personally have definitely learned this year that I definitely need to be more willing to stop trying one thing until it works, and also that you need to find the root cause of problems and make the changes that need to be made, instead of just making small, easy changes that are essentially just a band-aid for the problem. And even though for me this was both a language learning and a life lesson, I think that this lesson can be applied to so many areas of language learning, whether that's knowing when and how to change your approach to studying, your language learning habits, your materials to see better progress, or whether it's situations like this one where you're making general life changes to put you in a better place to dedicate more time to language learning. Which brings me to my second takeaway of the year. Life impacts language learning, and to be a good language learner, you need to take care of yourself. This was not an entirely new lesson for me. I have been talking about the impact that life and mental health have on language learning since I started posting videos on this channel nearly 8 years ago, but I do feel like this year in particular, I really gained a better understanding of the importance of self-care and more preventative actions when it comes to being a good language learner. Having experienced the burnout that I did the last 2 years and having seen the impact that had on my language learning, I can now really see how taking the steps to prevent burnout in the future will really help me to be more consistent with my language studies. And I also had to take a lot of breaks from language learning last year, and while that was never my favorite thing in the world, in fact, it was actually never my favorite thing, I really hated it, I can now see how beneficial and frankly needed that time away was, so that I can now come back to language learning with a clearer head and an excitement to be doing it again. And 2023 was also the year I decided to put ASL down for now because of the pain that it was causing in my hand and wrist. It wasn't like that wasn't an issue in 2022, but in 2022 I definitely had a lot more of a mindset of I'll just power through and it'll be okay. And now I'm not, because I know that it's better for me to take a step back and take care of myself and come back to it when I feel like I'm able to, instead of forcing it and ultimately probably needing to put it down in the future because it has caused so much pain. So yeah, take care of yourself. It's good for you and it's good for your language learning, I promise. Moving in a bit of a different direction, another lesson that I definitely heard prior to 2023, but definitely feel like I really internalized and actually learned this year, is that it is so much better to accidentally join a class that is above your level than to second guess whether you belong in a class at your level and then accidentally join something below your level. I took my first classes with the Alliance Française this year, and even though I had to take a placement test to even sign up for any of the classes, I still worried a lot before my first class that I wasn't actually at the level that I thought I was, and that I did not belong in the class that I was signing up for. I kept feeling like I was gonna get there and I was gonna speak, and immediately the teacher was gonna stop class and be like, "You do not belong here, get out." But that was of course not the case. It was totally fine, and I should have trusted that the person who interviewed me knew what level I was, and more importantly, I should have trusted myself and that I know what my level is and what classes are right for me. But I also know that that's really difficult for me, so the key thing that I really feel like I learned this year is that sometimes I'm not gonna pick the right class, and I'm going to end up in a class that isn't exactly my level. But it's better for me to overshoot and end up in a class that is a little bit beyond me, or be pleasantly surprised that it is my level, than to hold myself back and end up in a class that is a little bit below my level and is entirely review. And that's really for two reasons. The first reason being that I know personally I really tend to worry that I am overjudging my level, which as a result ends up making me underestimate my level. And because I know that an ideal language class is like my level plus one. It's a little bit of new material, but I can still follow everything. And so it's a lot more beneficial for me to end up in a class that really challenges and pushes me, but is maybe just a little bit too far out of my reach of understanding, than to be in a class where I just know everything and I don't learn anything new. I took a German Lingota class that was like at the end of a unit that I had taken no other classes within, so I really did not have the vocabulary to keep up with some of the materials. But you know what? It was not the end of the world, and I learned a lot. Maybe not as much as I would have if I was at a more appropriate level for that class, but I still learned things, and if I'd been taking a class on how to introduce myself in German, something that I know how to really do very comfortably, I wouldn't be able to say that. And so both of those class situations have really taught me to stop worrying so much about what level I'm at and if I'm the right level for a class, and to just dive in, because either I'll end up in a class that is appropriate for my level or I won't, but I'll still get something out of it. And speaking of me overthinking things, I definitely came to the realization this year that YouTube impacts my language learning and how I feel about my language learning a bit more than I previously thought. I've been posting YouTube videos in various niches since 2011. I've been watching language videos since 2015 or so, and then I've been posting them myself since 2016. I've been doing this for a while, and because of that, I definitely felt confident in the fact that I wasn't thinking too much about what other people were doing, and my language learning experience wasn't that affected by the fact that I share it online. And I think that was somewhat true for a few years, but I think that that was because I was in such a good groove with my language learning that I just felt so confident in my approach that I didn't feel a need to compare myself to other people or to think about what people might expect from me. But this past year, I found it a lot harder to take a step back from language learning because I didn't want to be posting videos where I was just updating that I hadn't been studying, and I also didn't want to not be posting at all. And it was a lot harder for me to consume language content and to see people being successful with their language learning despite their busy schedules and I'm sure struggles going on behind the scenes, and then not start to feel like I should also have my own approach a little bit more figured out and that I shouldn't be getting held back by the things going on in my personal life. And I feel like I worried about the consequences of my decisions a lot more. Like when I was deciding that I no longer wanted to pursue taking the DELF this year, I unfortunately didn't just think about how the decision affected me and how the goal wasn't really much of a goal for me anymore. I also thought about what people would think when I said that I was dropping that goal. I really jumped to the worst conclusions and felt like people were gonna think that I had decided not to take the test because I knew that I would fail, or think that I'm weak in some way for deciding that I didn't want to power through the very not fun process of studying for a standardized test. And those never should have been things that I even thought about. It had originally been a personal goal for me to take the test, and it no longer was. And so it should have been a personal choice between just me and myself to decide that I no longer wanted to pursue that. It's not really a surprise to me that I had this realization this year. I think with everything going on in my life, my insecurities were really heightened, and I was just in general sort of primed to be on edge with things. But regardless, I'm really glad that this year it was called to my attention that YouTube is having a little bit of an impact on the way that I think about myself and my language learning, because I love making YouTube videos and I love sharing my language learning experience on here, but I also love language learning, and I never want either of those things to take away from the other one. And so after this year, I feel like I'm a little more trained to recognize when I'm maybe falling into unhealthy thought patterns and can really find a way to let the two healthily coexist as they should. In 2024, I am definitely being more intentional with the ways that I look at other people's content, and that this is a channel to document my progress and share my advice and my experiences, and that can only happen happen, if I'm honest, not only with all of you, but also with myself throughout the entire process of learning languages and making videos. And the good news there is that I already feel like I'm doing a bit better. Posting my 2023 reflection video allowed me to see that you didn't all yell at me for doing what was best for me and taking a break or deciding that I no longer wanted to work on goals that I had talked about at the start of the year, and was a great reminder that I have a tendency to really overthink things in often the worst ways. And lastly, also tied to the DELF, I learned this year that priorities change and it's okay to give up on goals even if you've had them for a really long time. And you might be saying, Abigail, basically every single goals video you've made over the last 8 years, you've had a little disclaimer where you've talked about how goals change and plans change. Why is this a lesson that you learned in 2023? And yeah, you're right. Knowing that it is okay to have goals change and to adapt your plans based on that is not a lesson that I learned on its own this year. But while reassessing what I want and adapting or letting go of goals accordingly has never been an issue for me on a month-to-month or yearly basis, I definitely have a harder time coming to the realization that it's time to let go of bigger long-term goals. Maybe it's because it feels a little bit more like just giving up. Maybe it's because I don't like that then I have to let go of this thing I've been thinking about for so long and actually think about what I want now. I don't know, but I definitely experienced this when deciding that I was no longer going to try to take the DELF this year. If I'm being really honest with myself and with all of you, I was not even excited about preparing for the DELF at the end of 2022 when I set it as a 2023 goal. But because I'd had the goal for so long, and because in 2022 I had set it as a goal that I wanted to prepare to take the exam and to be ready for it, it was of course logical for me to keep preparing and to finally take the test this year and be done with it. And it wasn't until there were big things happening in my personal life that made me really look at my life and reassess what my priorities were and let go of the things that weren't, that I knew that it was better for me to let go of this goal that was no longer a goal and was ultimately sucking the fun out of language learning for me. This is definitely a lesson that I learned and am implementing in the rest of my life as well. And although it took not great circumstances for me to really learn it and for me to really reassess what I want and what I don't, I'm really glad that I did, because I think it's going to help me feel a lot happier and more fulfilled in all areas of my life. And yeah, those are some of the big takeaways that I had in 2023. I hope that you enjoyed this video and feel like you got something out of it, especially because I honestly feel like I really got something out of it. I definitely felt a bit bummed out reflecting on my 2023 in terms of goals completed or not completed, but looking at it this way really shows me that I learned a lot and grew a lot, even if it wasn't necessarily in the ways that I was expecting or hoping for at the start of the year. I'd love to know any lessons that you feel like you learned in language learning or in life in 2023. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, practice makes progress.